back. Dr. David Wurmser is in the house, I'm very pleased to say. He is one of the most accomplished national security practitioners in the Middle East space, certainly that I know of, and one of the most sound, for that matter, as well. He has served an undersecretary of state. He served a national security advisor, and he has served a vice president of the United States, in addition to his service in uniform as a naval intelligence officer. He rose through the ranks to that of a lieutenant commander in the reserves. And he has been a valuable resource for this program from many years. We're delighted to have David. He these days runs the Middle East program at the Center for Security Policy and is a good friend as well as a valuable mentor to me personally. Welcome back, sir. Good to have you with us.
That's great. It's great. Always an honor, Frank. Always an honor.
Thank you. Well, we're looking to you to help explicate what the United States government is now up to with respect to undermining Israel and trying to prop up one of its enemies and one of ours, namely Hamas. David, earlier this week, the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense sent a letter to the government of Israel, essentially saying, open up the floodgates for whatever we decide is necessary to provide humanitarian assistance in the northern part of Gaza, or else we'll cut off your access to weapons, including weapons you've purchased and have been planning to receive now, in some cases, for years. What's going on here, sir?
What the United States is doing is trying to keep Gaza as an independent entity, essentially under Hamas's rule. I mean, it doesn't say that's what its goal is, and it probably thinks that it can keep it under the Palestinian Authority rule with some remnants of Hamas that are, quote, moderate. It wants to maintain the territorial integrity of Gaza, which is very problematic for Israel. First of all, legally, Israel has the right to take a lot of territory of Gaza for itself, if not the whole thing, apart from the fact that it's the mandate. The legal questions are separate here. Just suffice it to say, Israel has extensive legal rights in Gaza. It is not a normal occupied territory because it isn't technically occupied territory. But that said, what the United States is doing here is interfering in a heavy-handed way, even suspending traditional respect for Israeli institutions in order to ram down Israel's throat a maintenance of the Hamas structure in the northern part of Gaza, which for Israel is particularly sensitive because the northern part of Gaza was the bulk of where the October 7th attacks occurred from. It is close to Israeli cities, Ashkelon and Sderot and Netivot. It was from there that the greatest threat happened and where most of the hostages were taken immediately after after the invasion on October 7th. And it was from there that Hamas had easier range for certain missiles to hit the center of Israel, Tel Aviv. So for Israel, strategically, the control of the northern part of Gaza is more important even than the control of the rest of Gaza. In fact, it's more. You could theoretically give up a bit, but they simply cannot give up the northern part of Gaza. The problem is, when Israel ordered the evacuation of the northern part of Gaza, a certain amount of Gazans did not leave that area, despite the fact that they were under evacuation orders, partly because Hamas shot at them when they tried, and partly because some were Hamas agents, and partly because some just didn't want to leave. So the Israelis lately have been trying to put more pressure on them to leave. But the most important thing that the Israelis have done is they've tried to create alternative food distribution structures in the north, decoupled from UNRWA, the United Nations, which is really a front for Hamas at this point, because ultimately Hamas's money and survival depends on control of that humanitarian aid. So the Israelis were creating alternative structures to aid in the north, where people shouldn't even be. But nevertheless, they were providing alternative sources. And if you read this letter threatening Israel from the United States, it very clearly zeroes in not only on the provision of aid, which is happening, it's happening more under Israeli control, but specifically to turn it back over to the United Nations and to the Red Cross, which were involved with Hamas and are the lifeline for funding for Hamas. So essentially, we are now threatening Israel to try to impose on it the survival of Hamas in the northern part of Gaza Strip.
Yeah. And David, what are the implications of that in terms of the larger war that Israel was compelled to fight as a result of the attacks of October 7th, 2023? I mean, is this not essentially a prescription for protecting Hamas, not just in the north, but presumably throughout the Gaza Strip?
And also in the West Bank and in Jordan, where these are battlegrounds as well. Israel, I mean, at the end of the day, what you're facing here is as a result of Hamas's attack on Israel, or as part of Hamas's attack on Israel. Now we know Iran was deeply involved in the planning of October 7th. Iran has opened a 7-front, now it's, I think, increasingly could be called an 8-front war against Israel. Uh, and Israel has been attacked first by all these fronts, the actors on all these fronts. Hamas attacked first, Hezbollah attacked first, Iran attacked first, Hamas attacked first from the West Bank, the first terrorist attacks among Israeli Arabs, etc. Yemen attacked first. So here is a clear case of Israel literally being attacked in a surprise attack followed by a series of other attacks without provocation. And we're in a surreal position where the United States is threatening to cut off the arms supply, we as the only real ally to Israel, the arms supply to Israel, while it's being attacked by all these terrorist entities.
But I want to just press you on this point, David, because if we're watching the administration engage in this kind of extortion of Israel before this November's election, I mean, the guillotine would fall on the other side of it. 30 days would include part of the post-election period. But I mean, the pressure is on right now. Israel is responding right now. But if this is what they're prepared to do in advance of a general election in which there's an awful lot at stake in terms of how they are perceived to be dealing with this war, both from the community of pro-Hamas and pro-Jihad, for that matter, and also, I think, from the perspective of an awful lot of Jewish voters as well. What does this suggest we're likely to see from such an administration after the election?
Well, first of all, the Biden administration is more, Biden cannot be called a pro-Israeli president under any circumstances. But the minimal amount of commitment he still retains to Israel is much more than what we've had any indication from Kamala Harris. And I think part of this indicates her influence on Biden's policy. I think what this shows, because the timing of this is that the embargo would be in place after the election, that this is not, that this is the policy. We're laying the groundwork for coming down on Israel after the election. It has to be laid now, but it literally is a day after the election. The November 7th, 8th period is when these sanctions, these embargoes would take place. So we are severing our tie. By the way, there's other things that are happening that are clearly orchestrated by the State Department as well, which are that Italy has announced an arms embargo, France has announced an arms embargo, United Kingdom, Britain has announced an embargo. Germany has said we cannot participate in the embargo. So you see an international effort led, unfortunately, to me it seems, by the United States now to orchestrate not only this specific embargo mentioned in the letter, but a Western alliance-wide embargo, a European-American embargo of Israel, which is stunning given the extensive amount that China and Russia and North Korea are involved with Iran, and the unlimited amount of support Iran is giving for these terrorists. So literally, we are stripping Israel of its weapons while allowing unfettered access to weapons by Israel's enemies in a war in which Israel was attacked unprovoked. When you look at the policies of the administration right now, starting with Gaza, then moving to Hezbollah and then Iran, you cannot but come to the conclusion that we want the survival, and we're now interfering to protect these terrorist organizations and nations from Israeli power, which is now in a self-defensive thrust, beginning to win and turn the strategic tide against them, and we're intervening to help them. But what's so interesting about this is that we're also doing the same on the international level. We are saving the destruction of the UN structure and the international organization structure that has essentially participated in the strategic attack on Israel. The UN Relief Works Agency is essentially a terrorist organization, and we're now intervening. But what's worse is if you read the letter very carefully, there's a clause in the letter that undermines Israeli sovereignty. So we are now using these international organizations in Gaza to establish the precedent.
One other facet of what they seem to be contemplating or even planning to do once the election is behind them, win, lose, or maybe even draw, who knows, namely the recognition by the United States of a Palestinian state. Not exactly sure what that looks like and how it would come about, but talk us through what the strategic implications would be were the government of the United States to do such a thing.
Well, I think on the highest level, it once again proves what unfortunately Henry Kissinger said in the 70s, which is it's dangerous to be America's enemy. It's fatal to be its ally at times. This on the largest level, it shows that the United States is working overtime to help the enemies of the United States and its allies against the interests of its allies and itself. And that is not a prescription for global presence, power, respect. We are acquiring a reputation for perfidy, which is fatal for a great power. That's on the highest level of interest. More specifically,
so what you're saying though is to go back to Kissinger, it could be fatal for our friends.
yeah,
But it actually could be fatal for our vital interests as well, and maybe indeed, for large numbers of Americans, if these various enemies of Israel have their way and are able to bring, as they endlessly profess, death to America.
Our alliance structure in the world is not built on power; it's built on trust. We have like-minded nations that understand the United States leads the free world, and that being free countries such as Germany or Britain or Israel, or allied with free countries like in Japan or South Korea, or allied with free countries or on the side of more free countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and so forth, which aren't themselves really free, but support the Western alliance globally or try to. What we see is that we are trying to appease our enemies at the expense of our friends, and in the end, you will have enemies that disdain you and dismiss you, have nothing but contempt, and friends that just fear you and run from you, which means you'll be isolated and alone, and the cost and the burden of American foreign policy will grow exponentially as a cost, because nobody will be out there helping America, because it's fatal. We will turn our back on them and stab them in the back.
Right.